Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we are going to be venturing to the very top of most homes, to see the horrors that can be found lurking in the attic. I also want to remind you all that on my other channel, I am hosting a giveaway. There are still 5 more days left, so be sure to check out the video that my wife and I have made on witches. It's a documentary style video with 3 stories of 5 different witches, all true mind you, that I'm sure will leave you rather unsettled. It's historical, it's spooky, and I hope you will enjoy it. And for every 1,000 views, a new prize will be sent to one of you who comments. So be sure to go over there, listen to the whole thing, and let me know what you think. I hope that you like it. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. As a young kid, I grew up in the South, primarily Fort Worth/Dallas, Texas, and Montgomery, Alabama. It's important to point out that any kids mentioned, including myself, had not been exposed to the bogeyman or any bump-in-the-dark concept that may have spurred this situation until it was already happening. We lived in multiple homes, all of them on the fringe of suburban development, where my parents would commute, but still in the country. My parents were both raised on farms and didn't want me to be a city kid entirely. All of these small homes, while we lived in the South, were adjacent to large ranch pastures and cotton fields that would give way to more countryside. It was commonplace to see all kinds of critters, from rattlesnakes to tarantulas in the front lawn. I'm not sure if the rural Gulf Coast region is significant, but I thought I'd make a mention of it, as it may help someone narrow this down as what was going on. Anyway, I was an only child, with a mother who stayed at home back in 92 to 95. My mother is an elementary school teacher and really pushed reading and writing on me at an early age. I was crudely but frequently reading before I was 3. Mostly picture books and Dr. Seuss, nothing too complicated. Reading is significant for me to bring up with this experience, since it exposed me to this thing through a little habit I had in relation to my reading. I had this awesome animal skeletal book back then. In the book, the diagrams of the different skeletons would glow in the dark, so I got into a habit of charging my book. Then, alone, I would go into a closet or cupboard and view it in the darkness. This became a way for me to have privacy as a kid, and began as something that was very enjoyable for me. I would take a flashlight and read my book in the dark. The sensory deprivation would help me focus or calm down, just sitting in the dark alone with a book and my imagination. Not seeing my hands in front of my face was a very novel phenomenon at that age. I'm explaining this since I want people to understand I was extremely comfortable as a toddler/kid to be in the dark and to be in there alone. Sitting in a pitch black room was synonymous with fun for me. The first memory I have of that changing was at the first house. It was 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, with a porch next to a lake. It was very cozy, and something right out of ideal Southern Americana. I remember reading Harold's Purple Crayon by flashlight one afternoon, and lost my concentration because I had an overwhelming sense that the atmosphere inside the closet had shifted. I remember the fondness back then for the ambient silence and jet black space. The only sounds perceived were muffled noises from my parents or appliances through the walls. Instead, I vividly remember a claustrophobic, smothering feeling weighing on me, and a heavy ringing in my ears. My neck felt flushed and hot, while hair all over my body stood up on goosebumps. Eventually, I became enveloped in the overwhelming feeling of paranoia and fled the closet crying and pitching a fit. I can't remember what happened in the closet. That really bothers me. My memories from this time are clear, leading up to and after I was inside the closet. I remember my parents calming me down by reassuring me that I loved playing in the closet and that I must have let my imagination get the best of me. For the little time left that we lived at that house, I became increasingly more skittish, but only around those closets. But I would still sleep soundly in my own room overnight. I suspect because I had no concept of any creepy, what goes bump in the night type of ideas quite yet. Fortunately, we didn't spend much more time at the house before moving to another one across town, still in Fort Worth. The new place was a one-level duplex, with 2 beds and 1 bath. The neighbours in the other half had 2 daughters around my age, and I would go on to stay in touch with them in later life. I remember specifically asking these girls about any funny business they might be aware of, to reassure myself that I had nothing to worry about. The recent events really had shaken me up, and adults disregarded these concerns. So better to ask kids my own age. The 2 of them were absolutely ignorant of anything I was suggesting. Not that they could really assure me of anything, being that they weren't even in grade school, but I felt assured nonetheless. My heart caved in when I got the bedroom with the closet that had access to the attic that same day. Why my parents did that to me when I was on edge is still beyond me today. I guess they thought it was an opportunity for me to overcome my fears. Parents have done worse things in the name of a child's development, I suppose. My father tried helping with my anxieties by inspecting the attic with me present when I objected to the room. It didn't help, because for the next year we lived there, I would only sleep in that room 2 times. The first night is again a repressed/hazy memory. I just remember being traumatized by waking from a nightmare and seeing the closet door opening, running out of the room hysterical, and then sleeping with my parents. For the preceding year, trying to fall asleep in that room was a test in enduring extreme terror, like holding a hand over a candle flame until the pain became too much to bear. An instinct pulls your palm away. I would try to hold out in the room, because my parents thought I was just going through a phase. Telling them the closet door was opening on its own didn't matter. Hearing the type of thing from a 3-year-old isn't cause for concern. Each night, the house would lull to sleep while I stared terrified of this door, and once one of my parents began to snore, the door would start to open. After this went on for a week, my dad slept in my bed with me, and that was the first time I made it through a night. It was still stressful though, as my dad insisted we should watch the closet door until I passed out. I did, and woke up for the first time in my father's embrace feeling safe. To my parents' credit, they didn't get upset or force me to sleep in the room even after this. They simply made a bed on the floor beside their own that I would occupy each and every night. I'm sure my constant sleeping there was why I didn't get a sibling sooner. The second time I slept in the room was when my dad's side of the family visited. 3 of my cousins and I all crashed in the room. Even with company over though, I never let my guard down. During the daytime, if I spent any time in the room, I would face the closet. The reason for this habit was I was in the room playing with my stuffed animals one day, with my back to the closet, alone. That day, I heard the doorknob open, and when I looked to see where the noise came from, the door was cracked and shut itself as soon as I looked into the darkness inside. This thoroughly scared the shit out of me, and I had my parents inspect the closet to no avail. I had thought I was safe during the day, and had come to terms with whatever it was. It didn't care about waiting until night to take me. I remember around then seeing a National Geographic for the first time, and likening my own situation to being hunted in the savannah with an antelope. My parents thought nothing of me explaining my situation like this. They only thought I was being clever, and were proud that I had such an imagination. I became more paranoid and jumpy as a consequence, and was always high-strung inside the house. I would always be within arm's reach of my parents. I remember sprinting to back and forth between them when they were in different parts of the house. At 3 and 4 years old, I believed that I was playing cat and mouse for my life. Every night having my heart in my throat as I escaped to my parents' room, and never having them believe me. The first people to believe me, though, were 2 sons of a family my parents knew through my father's job. I had stopped closet reading altogether at the duplex by this time. The only way I interacted with the closet, or the bedroom, was when company was over after a few months. These 2 boys were over for a playdate during the middle of the week. Their ages were 4 and 5, and they constantly quarreled over toys and getting their own way. They wrestled and hit one another, and it just became par for the coarse behavior with them. They were typical young brothers, and we had many adventures together with the neighbor girls, kicking over fire ant hills and jumping on backyard trampolines. That day though, we were playing in my room, and they began questioning why I didn't want to get puzzles out of the closet or go near it. I explained myself, and the older brother thought I was making it up to scare them. This resulted in them daring each other to sit by the closet with the lights out, until one chickened out. Nothing happened, and eventually they even had me convinced I was imagining things. I still can't believe how dumb I was letting my guard down, but I wanted to believe so badly that all the times I watched the door open, that it was just my imagination. We all sat inside the closet with the door shut and lights off. The older brother was making fun of me for how silly I was, and I was just trying to laugh it off, all in jet black darkness. I remember finally sitting and relaxing, and was remembering how much I enjoyed not being afraid of the dark. We all sat there and took it in. It wasn't bad, and I was finally hopeful that it really was a phase. They then began to fight. One accused the other of pinching him, and the other denied it. The younger, a moment later, again demanded his brother stop messing with him, and again the older claimed he hadn't touched him. They both began to tell me that they weren't falling for my prank, and I denied touching anyone. The 3 of us all began squabbling, until the younger brother yelped, then in a panic, opened the closet door to get out. The 3 of us, all scared, confused, and not to be left alone in the closet, ran from the bedroom into the kitchen, all of us feeling like we were being chased. The younger brother had a long scratch along his forearm and was bleeding. The cut wasn't deep, but enough to draw a trickle of blood. as if a cat had scratched him with a single large claw. Neither myself or his brother had any trace of blood on us, and my mum was confused and upset, trying to piece it together. She tried to get us to explain what happened, but we were all more afraid of being in the house than articulating the events. She eventually told us to go out into the driveway, and we did our best to explain it to her once we'd all calmed down. She didn't believe it, of course, and their mum ended up grounding them once they got picked up. The scariest thing I remember was my mum checking the room and finding nothing, except that the closet door was closed, and we three knew that none of us had shut it during our escape. Eventually I saw the brothers again, and they said they were experiencing something now, because they were terrified of their home basement. They said they used to play downstairs in a guest bedroom before the event at my house, but now they were too shaken up. I believed the two of them. The two of them both looked tired and fearful, compared to the troublemakers they were before. The girls next door also began to have problems. I remember distinctly a night I escaped my room to my parents and felt it was a closer call than normal. As I was relaxing in my pre-made bed on the floor, I was interrupted when through the wall next door, the two girls began screaming. This woke up my parents, and my father even went next door to see if there was something wrong, because the commotion made him think there was a break-in. Later, the girls revealed that one had gotten up in the night to use the bathroom. The other, in their shared bedroom, had something try and pull her out of her bed by her hair. For the rest of the summer, this kind of thing went on. I constantly had the feeling of being a hunted animal in my house, and would sleep with my parents. The neighbor girls and I were sleep deprived, and I remember getting badly sunburnt from falling asleep on a trampoline in the backyard, because I was too afraid to rest. At the end of summer, my parents decided that we were moving to Alabama. The last night of the move, my mum finally became a believer to whatever was after me. The floor plan of the duplex was a kitchen/living room in the front of the house, with a single long hallway leading from it to my parents' bedroom at the back. During the last night, my parents were packing up their bedroom into boxes and walking back and forth between the U-Haul parked in the driveway. I had the sense that the thing after me understood that this was the last night to get me. I mentioned I would follow my parents closely. Well, that night, I was clinging to my mum's leg. I would follow her from the bedroom to the U-Haul and back. As we passed by my room, the hallway door to my room was open, and you could view the closet door from the hall. Each time I passed by, I would witness the door opening and then quickly shutting as soon as I looked into the room. I nearly fainted from the stress of seeing this every time we passed by to deliver a box, and my parents were pretty stressed after a year of me being distraught. They were almost done packing up their bedroom, and later that evening, my mum was in their bedroom alone. I had decided to stay in the living room near the front door, and my father was organizing boxes in the U-Haul. From the living room, I could see my mother down the hall in her room. She at one point asked me why I wasn't helping her, and suggested I come to her and help her fold clothes since she was almost finished. I refused, and in an attempt to assure me that there was nothing to fear, she walked over to my bedroom hallway door, as if to say, "Look in," and say, "See? Nothing here." Instead, my mom walked to my bedroom door and froze. I heard the closet door in my room slam shut, and my mum screamed and ran over to me and scooped me up. She ran with me to my father and told him that we had to leave. I remember crying and being mentally exhausted, as this just confirmed the madness wasn't over, and even my mother was distressed over it. My parents argued, but my dad gave in. He lets my mum take me and herself to a Super 8 for the night, while he finishes packing. My mum spent that night clutching me with all the lights and TV on in the hotel room. I woke up the next morning tucked into a bed and assumed that she never fell asleep that night. I remember telling her I told her so. She gave me a worried look and just stroked my face and hugged me. She never has admitted to anything about that night. She just leaves it as she didn't like the house and can't remember much else. My dad also hasn't spoken about what happened after we left that night. He told me later that he just finished packing and slept in the U-Haul. I would say that after we moved to Alabama for the next 2 years, and eventually up to North after, things improved. The haunted home we left behind imprinted on me some trauma and paranoia that still lingers with me now as an adult. I've stayed in touch with the 2 girls next door and learnt that they moved out shortly after us. They said the kids that went to school with them in Dallas had similar experiences about the closet/attic monster that would also torment them. I personally from time to time research what it might have been, but always conclude that it was better to leave it be. Until now, I figured someone could help here. I just had a daughter whom I would like to prevent and protect from going through the same crap, as she is only a few months old right now. I don't know what to do. My childhood experience has really made me afraid that there is something out there that tries to hurt and take young children that isn't easily explained. In Emigrant, Montana, a village-sized town that has roughly 500 people, resides a large ranch house with a main floor, attic, remodeled into a bedroom, and an ancient basement. It's located just before the Mill Creek Bridge that crosses the Yellowstone River. It is a very large house with acres of land. My grandma and grandpa raised my dad and his sister Aunt Elle and their half-sister there. It was built in the late 1800s or early 1900s, and because it was a massive property with a barn and separate garage as well as multiple chicken coops and field for livestock or crops, naturally a few ranch hands had died on the property before they'd moved in. For an idea of what the house looks like, there's a large main floor consisting of 2 bathrooms, 4 bedrooms, a laundry room, and a huge kitchen. Up the stairs, which is down a lengthy hall from the living room, led up to only one room. I think it used to be an ordinary attic back in the day, but when my dad grew up there, it had already been remodeled into a bedroom. This was my Aunt Elle's bedroom. I've talked to Aunt Elle before about her bad experiences in the house, mostly occurring in her solitary attic. She told me she had suffered from terrible screaming night terrors often, and even as a teenager refused to sleep up there and instead slept on a mattress in the living room with my grandma. She once described one of her night terrors to me. In her dream, she was being pinned to her bed in the attic, unable to move, surrounded by numerous human-like figures in red robes. To me, this sounded like sleep paralysis, but she was thrashing around and screaming in her sleep, so it couldn't have been. Aunt Elle was pretty scared after that experience, and my grandma brought a small crucifix for her to wear as a necklace. They were somewhat religious, Catholic, and attended a local church, but usually just my Aunt Elle and Grandma would go. The rest of the family didn't seem to care about religion. But while wearing the crucifix, she found that the night terrors stopped, even while sleeping in her haunted room. She said it made a huge difference, and she was finally able to feel almost safe in her room, and everything was getting better. Aunt Elle doesn't know how, but she misplaced the necklace a few years later, and almost immediately, the terrible dreams and restless nights came back. It became so bad that apparently they had an exorcism, even though that might not be the correct term, because only certain priests are licensed by the Vatican to perform real exorcisms. But I'd call this a Montana village version of an exorcism. My grandma called on members of the church asking for help after she became increasingly concerned with Aunt Elle's behavior, among other strange happenings around the house, like cupboards opening, objects moving, and strange noises. Many church members came to the house, including the pastor, and some drove for hours away to participate. They all stood in a circle in the living room and held hands, praying and attempting to rid the house of whatever was haunting it and the family. Aunt Elle says some people even started speaking in tongues. I find that part personally hard to believe, but I love and trust my aunt, and I'd like to believe it happened. Even with sage burning and crucifixes hung up on doors and a group of devout Catholics holding hands and chanting, the demonic spirits never left the house. The Montana-made exorcism had failed. There wasn't much my grandma could do. They were not allowed to leave the house, so they tried to live with it. Not long after the exorcism of the house, my Aunt Elle remembered her old crucifix working for her, and soon brought another one, almost identical to the first one she wore. Again, the hauntings and odd sleep behaviors calmed down, until they eventually grew up and moved out. The house was kept in the family, but everyone went their separate ways. They might have rented the place out for a while through the late 80s and 90s, I'm not sure why. Fast forward about 15 years, right before I was born. My dad, mum, and older brother, who was only 1 at the time, got permission from the family to rent the house, and moved in to run their horse and glass etching business from home. It was a beautiful spot to raise kids, right on the Yellowstone, with so much to entertain us. I was born in 1998, and lived at that house for about 6 years. I only have memories through the ages of 4 to 6 in that house, and my brother was 6 to 8, and has even better memories than I. My parents told us countless stories after we moved out and grew older. We all remember how creepy it felt living there, and we all agreed it was haunted. Once I no longer used a crib, I got my own bed and room. My room was next to the kitchen, but my brother was really far away on the other end of the house. I hated the way my room felt, so I played in my brother's room a lot. The main floor was honestly massive and really sketched out, like a maze almost, especially for a 5-year-old. My parents took the attic room for privacy. My dad told me that shortly after moving in, and while I was too young to know what was happening, the night terrors began. My mum was sleeping in the living room on a futon alone at first most nights, which wasn't out of the ordinary, because my dad would snore so loud that she couldn't sleep through it. She later admitted she couldn't stand the vibe coming from that room anyway. My brother and I always had nightmares. I especially had terrifying ones about the house itself that I will never forget. We rarely slept in our rooms, which is normal for kids of that age, and eventually it got to the point where every night we slept by our mum on the futon. Our own rooms gave us the creeps, and our parents knew it and never once questioned it. I know my brother and I were not scared to sleep alone, just scared to sleep alone in that house. The whole property gave off a creepy feeling, but we just felt safest together. My dad still slept there alone, in the same attic where his sister had experienced a repetitive demonic presence 20 years prior. I know he remembers living in that house as a kid, so I'll never understand why he stayed in that room. Most nights, he would get night terrors and scream so loud we could hear it downstairs, down the hall, and in the living room. I could tell it scared my mum too, although she handled it well. He would scream bloody murder until my mum would go into the attic to wake him up. This became a routine thing, but never once got less freaky. He suffered from extreme insomnia at that house, being too scared to fall asleep, or just couldn't sleep. I remember my dad looking like a zombie to me during the time, probably from being so restless and working a lot. He didn't take on the whole religion thing as a kid, and never turned to the church for help. Talking to him later on, however, he admits it was very haunted. His night terrors usually involved my brother, mum, or myself getting murdered. He spared me the details most of the time, and didn't ever feel comfortable speaking about it. My mum, who was an atheist, although was also raised Catholic, had her sand blasting machine set up in the creaky, leaky basement that had stairs down from the kitchen, and a cellar door outside leading to it as well. The concrete staircase spiraled down and was pretty steep. The basement itself was riddled with mice, and I think we even found a feral cat with babies down there. It honestly looked like an old, damp torture chamber, with terrible lighting and mold everywhere. My mother spent countless hours in that basement, putting designs into glassware and tiles to sell so that she could help my dad support us. She told me she always had terrible feelings from being down there alone, and hated working in the dim light. Often, she would open the cellar door to let light in, but she hardly let my brother and I keep her company down there while she was working. Around 2004, we moved out, and the family sold the whole riverfront property for roughly $1 million to some rich guy who wanted to rent the rooms out for fishermen. Last I checked though, it has since been sold or rented out to some hippies who raise goats. I drove by it last week, and you can see through the giant glass windows that she has the rooms illuminated with red lights for some reason. My mum began having sleep paralysis at the house, but doesn't get it much anymore. My parents divorced in 2014, and she is now engaged to someone else, about to be happily married this March. My dad's night terrors continued for years after we moved, but eventually they stopped. His insomnia never went away though, and he was restless until the day he passed away. It was last weekend, at the young age of 50. Since I was maybe 5, I've been having routine nightmares, crazy lucid dreams, and constant sleep paralysis, even though I live away from my family now, and in my own apartment. I have had a handful of petrifying paranormal experiences with my boyfriend. My brother is 23 now, and takes care of my grandma in the apartment my dad died in. He hasn't had nightmares like he used to, I think. We don't talk about that much anymore, but we are both busy people. My cousin, Aunt Elle's daughter, recently told me she also suffers from sleep paralysis and oddly frightening dreams, although she never lived in the ranch house. They did come a lot when we lived down there, so she has spent time in the house. We're both 20 years old now, and we don't talk much nowadays, but we always felt a stronger relationship than the other cousins did, because we look identical and sound alike. None of her brothers or sisters ever had any problems like that. It's currently 5:20 a.m., and I'm telling this story because Aunt Elle called me about an hour ago. This was out of character for her, because she has a normal 9-to-5 job, and thus a normal sleep schedule. She doesn't work tomorrow, but still is a little strange. She called me to tell me that she found her original crucifix, which she swore she'd lost 30 years ago in that house. She gave it to her daughter and told her to wear it, as Jesus is supposed to protect you from demonic presence. She also decided to give me her second crucifix, hoping it protect me from whatever invisible presence might be around me. I plan on never taking it off, as she really wants me to have this. Please understand that I know millions of people experience sleep paralysis and nightmares every day, and they aren't demonic. Even though they feel that way, scientists can somehow logically explain why these things happen to us in our sleep, with science. However, I don't feel like my family's experience can be completely explained. I was raised without a god to pray to, and have never been religious. In fact, doubting the presence of a higher power. Last Sunday, when my dad passed away, happened to be one of the gloomiest winter days. Once his soul let go and left his body, the sun came out from behind the dark clouds. I can feel for certain he's not far away. He's in the beautiful, clear sunsets that happen every night this week. In my thoughts, and also forever in my heart. It could just be a coincidence, or a silly way to cope. But I suddenly have no doubt he is watching over my family and I. Everything recalled by me and my family members is true. None of it is fabricated, and I didn't exaggerate any details. But keep in mind I was very young when I lived there, and it's totally possible that my mind may have misinterpreted some events. My dad's night terrors were scary as hell, no matter what age I was. I missed that house oddly though. I had my first memories there with plenty of amazing ones to weigh out the scary ones. I'm still not sure if I believe in Catholicism or any religion, but there just might be lost souls walking around us. Dad, I'd like you to know that you'll never be forgotten. Rest in peace. The first time we had an inkling that there was something in our room/hall, I had gotten up to go to the bathroom to have a coughing fit, so I wouldn't wake up my roommate. I came back, pulled out a cough drop, and sat in bed, staying awake and chewing on the cough drop, as I didn't want to choke in my sleep. As I'm sitting there, I hear two very light knocks on the door, like someone knocking with one finger or knuckle. Immediately after the knocks, I hear someone whisper, "Let me in." I look over to my bed to see if I can see any shadows out the hall from under the crack in the door, but I didn't see anything. I heard two more light knocks and then nothing. I thought maybe a hallmate had gotten locked out of their room and didn't wake their roommate. But when I asked my friends in the hall the next day, they had no idea and said they'd rather wake up their own roommates than someone else. The next time, about a month later, I got a little cocky, and some friends and I went up to the attics to see if we could look inside. The woman who keeps our building clean tells us that there's a ghost up there, and there are crosses drawn on the inside of the windows, and some are taped up, so that no one can see inside. So of course, being the dumb white people we are, we go upstairs and have a look. We didn't see anything, but being up there made the hair on the back of our necks stand on end. That night, and for 2 nights after, my roommate and I couldn't sleep for shit. Even though we were dead tired from our workouts, we couldn't fall asleep. We both blame it on the ghosts, but neither of us are really sure. The third time, about a month and a half ago, I woke up, facing the wall with my back to the rest of the room, to the sound of someone very quietly opening the dresser drawers. This went on for a few minutes, and I figured that my roommate was getting up early to leave and didn't want to wake me, so I went back to sleep. But I woke up at 7, and she was still in her bed. When she woke up later, I had asked her if she'd gotten up and opened some drawers. She looked at me and said no. Ordinarily, I'd blame it on sleepwalking, but she never sleepwalks. Never. I'm usually the one who talks or moves in their sleep, but she never has any history of doing that at all. The most recent time was just last night. My roommate's mum was in town, and she went to sleep with her in a hotel, so I was alone. I woke up at about 2 or 3 in the morning to the sound of glass being slammed on. I heard someone pacing around the room, and I heard someone sit down and start chewing. I stayed perfectly still, scared shitless, and trying not to make any sound that would indicate me being awake. Eventually I heard more pacing, and then I'm pretty sure I stopped hearing anything. I let my body relax after being held stiff as a board for about 10 minutes, and I eventually fell back to sleep. I ended up having nightmares that someone had crawled all over our walls, destroyed our room, and hung up creepy signs saying things like IGKYN, OID, and other stuff which subconsciously decided to translate I'm gonna kill you next, and OP is dead. I'm 100% confident I was fully awake for these encounters. It started out as kind of cute and fun, and I loved telling people about the ghost in my room. But after last night, I'm kind of terrified. I've never felt that scared in my own room. This happened when I was 9 or 10. I was staying the night at my friend Catherine's for the first time. We met the summer before and were inseparable ever since. Kat lived in this old 2-story house surrounded by woods and dirt road. The house itself gave me an uneasy feeling when I first saw it. The shutters were falling off. The paint on the house seemed to be fading. It was an old piece of shit now that I think about it. But at the time I was excited. I remember walking in after I stared at the house for what seemed like ages. Surprisingly, the inside was a lot nicer than the out, so I pushed that uneasy feeling down and just shrugged it off as nerves. I remember the smell of the house. I can't pinpoint it, but it was different, like walking into a musty room. I started to walk around just to explore my surroundings, but noticed Kat's mum watching me. I simply smiled and waved, but she stood there staring at me wide-eyed. I'd never met her before, but why was she staring at me like that? Suddenly, Kat flew around the corner and tackled me, and we both fell and started to giggle. I noticed Kat's mum out of the corner of my eye, start to turn around and walk off, and she was gone, just like that. Fast forward a few hours, Kat and I are lying on a beanbag in her room watching Children of the Corn, which, by the way, was one of my favourite movies at the time. I grew up watching horror movies, mostly Stephen King movies or any other movies my mum was watching at the time. Not her decision, mine, because I love the feeling of a good horror movie. She felt the same way, and that's why we clicked so much. So we were sitting there, watching this movie, and suddenly the door opposite us slams closed. We both jumped, giggled, and brushed it off, because we're kids. Until the second time, when it creaked open and slammed again. Not even seconds after the first time now. So now I'm sitting there, staring at this door, trying to figure out how the hell it's opening and closing alone. In the midst of all of that, the only other person in the house is her mum, which I figured out earlier was just a tad bit creepy. "You think it's just your mum?" I asked her, but she shook her head. "You sure?" I asked. I asked again, but she said something that gave me chills, and still gives me chills just telling this story. "My mum isn't home. It's just you and me, silly." I just stare at her for a while. She's staring at me, trying to wrap my head around what she just said. Who leaves their 9-year-old home alone with a friend in a 2-story house? "Where is your mum?" I asked her. "She's at work." I giggled, thinking she was trying to trick me. "She's at work. She only works for a couple of hours, so she leaves me here and she trusts me," she says. At this point, I was just looking at her, and she notices this look of worry on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "If your mum's at work, then who was the lady staring at me earlier?" As I said this, we hear what seemed like footsteps at the door, but thinking about it now, it sounded like shuffling in one spot above us. I'm completely scared at this point. Every hair on my neck is standing out, and I just want to leave. I start to get up, when Kat pulled me back down and asked me if I heard that noise. I nodded. It was silent again, until the footsteps were back, but louder and faster. We both stared up at the ceiling and she grabbed my hand. "This happens every day," she whispered. I looked over at her and could truly see the fear on her face. The footsteps stopped, and she looked at me, her face flushed white. "Is there an attic?" I asked. She pointed up towards the ceiling. "Well, maybe it's just squirrels or birds," I kept thinking over and over. You ever notice when you're really quiet? That's when you can hear most things around you. Imagine if you're sitting in a house with your best friend, alone, at 10 years old, and you hear the giggle of a 3-year-old child. Mind you, she has no younger brothers or sisters. We are completely alone. Kat was just as scared as I was. I remember thinking I just wanted to get out of this house, just grab her and run to the door. At least we would feel safer and less scared outside the house than we would be inside of it. "Want to hear a story?" Kat asked, putting my mind back into reality. I nodded. "Well, this house used to be a daycare. There was this lady that would watch the kids, and one day she just locked them in the attic and then hung herself from a rope in the kitchen. They all died because the kids were hungry and thirsty, and no one found them for months after. In this house." My heart started to pound, my eyes wide with fear, and I just looked at her. "It's true," she said. "I've seen them, the little kids, every day. But I've never seen the lady. But you have." After she told me this, I don't remember much else but running out of the door of her room and making it outside. She followed, begging me to stay, but I just had to get out. My stomach felt like knots. I felt like I'd walked into a horror movie myself and just wished this had never happened. Fast forward, years later. That day was the last day I had seen or heard from Kat. I remember what she looked like. I never remember meeting her parents or seeing them out in public. I'm 27 now, and I can't seem to find any proof that she exists. All my friends that I was friends with then, I'm still friends with even now. But why not her? I drove by that house maybe 15 times, and still wonder, was she one of the ones that never made it out? Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's attic stories. Growing up, we had an attic, but I never found it spooky. More annoying because sometimes there'd be wasps in there, or bees. Maybe just mostly wasps, really. And they're really annoying because they sting, so you really don't want to piss off a wasp. That was fun. If you liked the video, don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. I really do appreciate it. And if you're new, subscribe and press the little bell icon. I post new content every night, so be sure to keep up to date and receive your nightly spooks. Now that you've reached the end of this video, I do have a video over on my second channel all about witches. If you want to keep the stories up, I really do suggest you go and listen to it. I am personally really proud of it, and so is my wife. I think we did a really good job, and I'd love it if you guys watched it. For every 1,000 views, there's also a giveaway, so drop a comment to let me know if you want to enter on that video, and you might win some really funky stuff. But anyway, for now, guys, I'm going to sign off. Link is in the description and on screen now, by the way. And I'll see you in the next one.